Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Borders Scotland. My name's Lucy Small. I'm a freelance journalist, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined here today with Kate Rawles and Peter Walker. So, a bit of an introduction. Kate was an environmental philosophy lecturer and recently cycled across the Andes on Woody here. And Peter is a writer for The Guardian and author of How Cycling Can Save the World. So, Kate, if I can start with you. You talk a bit about the concept of adventure. I wanted to ask what attracted you to that and how you thought that would engage and inspire people.
Great question, thank you. So, I've always loved going on adventures as a personal thing, but I got really interested in the potential for using adventure to help raise awareness and inspire action on some of our biggest environmental challenges, which are out there and not yet being fully addressed, as I'm sure we all agree. So this seems to be like the ultimate win-win. How could I have an amazing adventure while also helping save the world? And so 10 years ago, I cycled on a different bike from Texas to Alaska, following the spine of the Rockies, exploring climate change in the height of the Bush administration, which, as you can imagine, was utterly fascinating. Came back and gave lots of slideshows and wrote a worst-selling book called The Carbon Cycle, which is in the book now. And so 10 years on, definitely time for another adventure, and so I've just come back from South America. I cycled with Woody, the bamboo bike, from one end of South America, from Cartagena in Colombia, following the spine of the Andes, more or less, to Ushuaia, the town they call the end of the world. And one of the most amazing aspects of that was that I built Woody. Never having built a bike before, I went to a workshop and built Woody from a pile of canes that actually came from the Eden Project in Cornwall. So it's one of the UK's first homegrown bicycles. And what's amazing is that not only was he still intact at the end, but he was the most reliable bike I have ever ridden, with virtually no mechanical problems for the whole way.
It just sounds incredible. So on a slightly different note, I wanted to ask, so individual action like yours obviously has to massively, effectively raise awareness of biodiversity loss and climate change issues, but how do you think we could move towards a collective changes to society as opposed to individual action?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. So one of the reasons I'm very excited about using adventure is that not only is it works as a communication medium, I think. People are interested in having adventures, but they also like hearing about them. So if you can package an important message in the context of an adventure story, it makes it more impactful. But I also think it's very, very important as a metaphor. We need huge social transitions if we're to achieve genuine sustainability. The sorts of changes that we need are to our transport infrastructure, as Peter will tell us more about, to our farming infrastructure. At the minute, the way humans meet their needs is incredibly destructive of the ecological life support systems that we all need on. So these transitions are big, and they're a little bit scary. We don't quite know where we're going, and we don't quite know how to get there. So if you think of that as an adventure, I think that's a really helpful metaphor, because not only does it give you a, yay, let's do this kind of idea, it makes the risk and the uncertainty a bit more palatable.
A bit more exciting,
It's a very positive take on it. So I think as a society, we need to become more adventurous in terms of our ambitions for social change, which are huge and urgent.
And then on a kind of more hopeful personal note, I wanted to ask, what do you think the potential is for bamboo bikes such as Woody to be built here in Scotland, as someone that would be very interested in having a bamboo bike?
Massive.
Okay, great.
Shall I say more?
Please, yeah.
Bamboo, as I'm sure you know, is one of the fastest growing plants on the planet, and it will grow in Scotland, and it grows at about a metre a week when it's in full flight and when the sun comes out. So it's an incredibly fast-growing plant. It takes more CO2 out of the atmosphere than your average tree, and you can harvest it without digging up the roots. So it's an amazingly sustainable source of a building material, and it's fantastically versatile. Around the world, people use bamboo for scaffolding. In Colombia, I saw lots of buildings made out of bamboo. There are bamboo bike projects in countries as diverse as Colombia and Ghana. So we could absolutely have bamboo bicycles in Scotland. They're more sustainable than steel, although a steel bike is still pretty sustainable, don't get me wrong. They're amazing to ride, very, very smooth, very comfortable. And rather, well, I'm not sure if you'd call Woody beautiful, but he's definitely unique.
No, I think he's beautiful.
You turn up on a bamboo bike and you just get mobbed. Everybody wants to
Yeah.
find out, what the heck is that and where have you come from? So I think lots and lots of potential. And it's a great craft, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
the skill involved in building a bamboo bike, you could employ lots and lots of people and roll them out. So I'd love to see our transport infrastructure
Yeah.
supplemented with bamboo bikes across Scotland, definitely.
Thank you, Kate. That's very exciting news to hear.
And totally
There's a
doable.
potential for it.
Totally
Yeah,
doable, yeah.
definitely. Peter, I wanted to ask, so in your book, you focus on cycling and how it encourages social interactions. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you think cycling affects social interactions?
Sure. I mean, one of the big reasons that people say that more cycling, by cycling here, I don't mean just the kind of, even the stuff that we were doing just earlier this morning, kind of cycling around for leisure. I mean the kind of everyday stuff, like cycling to and from work, cycling to school, kind of like walking only quicker, which people doing kind of everyday clothes. That kind of stuff, which is the type of cycling which really is going to change things. It has lots of very kind of tangible impacts, but one of the things that people don't necessarily focus on enough, it makes towns and cities more kind of livable, more kind of human scale. There is a theory that the maximum kind of speed differential at which you can keep eye contact with another human being is about 15 to 20 miles an hour, which is a pretty fast speed on a bike, but in a car it's very, very slow. So when you live in a town or city which is dominated by cars, it's these anonymous speeding metal boxes, which more often than not are just taking a single person a kind of laughably short distance that could be cycled. And I mean, just to take one personal example, one of the reasons I like cycling to work, apart from the fact it's the quickest way for me to do it, is the fact it's travel on a kind of human scale. And it means I can, kind of watch a city change, feel a season change. I can, smile at toddlers when I stop at traffic lights and things like that. But the other thing about it is that cycling is an incredibly equitable thing.
Yes.
That pretty much anyone can do it. And people always say, when you say, cycling is very important, well, my 75-year-old granny can't do it. Well, if she was Dutch, she probably would.
Yes,
she'd buy an e-bike.
Yep.
Or they say, my disabled neighbour can't. Well, there's a very, very good charity called Wheels for Wellbeing, which helps people with disabilities be fitted out with things like whether it's an adapted bike or a hand cycle or a trike or an electric assist trike. And they said they've never yet come across anyone who can't be helped out in some kind of way.
Yeah.
But the other thing as well is it doesn't rely on money. It's an incredibly cheap way to do it. And younger people can cycle. And it's just been shown time and again that in cities and towns where more people can ride bike, particularly the most vulnerable people, younger people, older people, people with disabilities, and poorer people are better connected.
Right.
Because they can cycle those 2 or 3 miles to see friends, do the shopping.
Yeah.
And it's something that's not really talked about much as this kind of cycling benefit, but it's a very, very big one.
Yeah. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, well, we could talk about this for a while, but so cyclists quite a lot are sort of pictured poorly in the media.
Yes.
And that I think has a massive negative impact. But also I wanted to touch on a little bit before you were talking about cities, and I wanted to ask, in an ideal world, if you could redesign cities to make them more cycle friendly, would that be something you're interested in? Or, I mean...
It's something that can be done.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, the only thing that's stopping it is the political will. We have an example 150 miles away over the North Sea that the Dutch had a very, very similar trajectory from Britain. They were a little bit more bike mad than the British. In fact, you could argue this, that, most European countries, up until World War II, their everyday transport was quite dominated by bikes. The Dutch took it that little bit further, to the extent that, and still into the 1980s, whenever the Netherlands football team played the West German football team as it was, during World War II, the German army confiscated lots of people's bikes for use by German troops, and the Dutch football fans, even 30 years later, used to chant, give us back our bikes.
Wow.
Which you can't imagine the English football fans. But that said, there's, people often say that the Netherlands is, different culture and stuff like that, but up until the 70s, they had the same thing, that after World War II, with increasing prosperity, you had more and more and more people driving, and their fatality and child injury, particularly injuries to children, massively went up. And there was a decision, partly based on political decisions, but a lot of it based on mass protests, which is a very, very long story, which I won't go into now, to basically re-engineer the streets. They spent about 40 years doing it, and Britain could do it. It's not magic. All it involves, in the kind of basic way, is if you have a high-speed, high-traffic road, you have to have separated bike infrastructure, which means not just a bike lane with a curb or a barrier, but separate traffic light signals for bikes. It's basically to keep the kind of 80, 90 kilos of bicycle and unprotected flesh and bone away from the 1 ton of speeding metal. It's quite basic. But weirdly, the more politically difficult thing is on smaller streets. You have to kind of tame the traffic in a variable way, partly by having very, very strict lower speed limits. On residential streets, it should be no more than 20 miles an hour, ideally less than that. But you also, and this is a really tricky bit, have to make it less convenient for people to drive short distances, which involves closing off rat runs, so having roads where you can permeate through on a bike but not in a car. And just, there's this kind of famous maxim that a bike lane which isn't suitable for the age varies, a 7 or 8 year old to cycle on their own, doesn't count as a bike lane. And it has to be not only safe but visibly safe. It has to be attractive and temporary, and it can be done.
Yeah. Just talking about the Netherlands, I lived in the Netherlands for a while, and I felt, having never really cycled in Scotland, I live in Edinburgh, so hilly city, I couldn't believe how, just what you were saying there, that the cycle lanes are not only the most attractive and useful way, it's just the cheapest, most economical, everybody does it. You're seen as totally insane to get a bus 20 minutes when you could cycle there in, I don't know, much less, I guess. So, but I also was reading a lot about the health benefits of, this is to both of you, I guess, just looking at the Netherlands and then comparing it to Scotland. Scotland has some of the worst obesity rates. I'm not saying that directly that cycling could affect that entirely. It's just that, again, with social interactions as well, that cycling should be pushed by the Scottish Government as a cheaper, more interactive, healthier way to get around the place.
I mean, if there is one thing, this is just my view, if there's one thing that will tempt politicians into rebuilding standard cities for cycling, it's going to be the public health argument. I mean, the figures I always use is that in the UK, every year there's about 100 cyclists killed on the roads on average, which is, more than it should be. If we had Dutch-style levels of cycling safety, it'd be about 30. But in the same average year, I mean, the figures are hard to pin down, and this is the figures for England and Wales, but the estimate is that every year the number of people whose lives are shortened, who die young due to complications connected, this is not being overweight, this is living inactive lives, which is a parallel but arguably even greater problem. It's on average estimated about 85,000 people every single year. And it's because people, the bulk of people, are simply not active. When they do these kind of public health studies of how far people walk and what they do,
people sit at their desks.
Well, it's completely astonishing, but it's more than that. They also kind of, it's partly workplace, but there's also no active travel. And some of the figures are completely shocking. That it's something like 20% of people don't walk for more than 10 minutes every month.
Wow.
It took as in 10 minutes in a single go.
Yeah.
And there's a reasonably high proportion of people, particularly over the age of 50 or something like that, who find it physically taxing to walk a mile or more at a reasonably brisk pace, which is effectively having a disability. It's just not kind of treated in that way. And physical activity has been removed for various social factors out of people's lives. And active travel, whether that's walking, particularly cycling, is the ideal way to bring it back. And the health benefits are amazing.
Yeah.
Day after day after day is really dangerous. So again, it comes back to that shifting to a more adventurous mindset.
Yeah. And
by adventure, I'm not necessarily meaning cycle the length of the Andes, because obviously most of us aren't lucky enough to quit our jobs and take a year off. But just small adventures around here in the lanes, or just cycling to work. And I also really loved what you said this morning about how if we can normalise just cycling as a way of commuting, you get all of those benefits, and you arrive at work in a good mood.
Yes,
and feeling happy about it.
It's interesting what you're saying about the Dutch. It's so normalised there that in Britain you have this idea of someone who's a cyclist, who kind of owns Lycra, has got opinions about gear ratios and stuff like that. Whereas in the Netherlands you do have those people. They ride road bikes and they're kind of hobbyists. But most Dutch people who ride a bike wouldn't define themselves as cyclists anymore than they would.
Mothers and fathers.
Well, they wouldn't define themselves as a person who takes showers or someone who wears coats. It's just something that they do. And that's the kind of thing that we kind of need. But still, the debate in Britain is very split about this idea about kind of Lycra labs and all that kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
And it's focusing on this kind of tiny aspect of it rather than the kind of broader whole.
As a personal question to you, Peter, would you want to borrow Woody or make your own bamboo bike?
I'm going to be astonishingly controversial here and say I think bamboo bikes are brilliant, but in terms of, you know, the overall kind of green environmental impact, then having a steel or aluminium or even carbon fibre bike, it doesn't really make any sense. And by the same token, I think building a bike of your own is completely brilliant. I've never done it, you know, I would love to do it, but that's because I'm a hobbyist, I'm kind of interested in this stuff. And for the big societal changes to happen, you know, it's completely fantastic, but it's a kind of separate issue. You know, yours is more of a kind of environmental, how to inspire people. And I think inspiring people is really, really important. But possibly the sad truth is that we won't get real change until, whether by force of events such as public health or sheer accident, we get a senior politician in power who understands it and can do it. You know, as has been shown in cities like New York and London, but by sheer chance you have someone in. And that's in some ways a slightly depressing message, but it's still worth harassing people all the time.
Well, I just wondered, kind of on that, if you think, for example, if personal ownership of cars will be reducing over the next 2 decades, and if so, what and how that would affect activities and the way that we live, as opposed to everyone owning a car. If that finally decreased, what would that look like in respect to cycling and people trying to push for it?
I mean, this is a fascinating thing that we're at a cusp of this kind of transport revolution. I mean, one of the interesting things is that when bikes were first popular, the car was kind of unknown, and when cars did come onto the roads, they were seen as this kind of curiosity, again, this kind of hobby. And the CTC, the Cyclist Tourist Club, which is now Cycling UK, there was this great debate that they had when cars were first around about whether they should, you know, allow motorists to kind of join their group.
Right.
But within 20 or 30 years, the cars had taken over and the cyclists and pushed up.
Yeah.
And there's an argument for saying, with autonomous vehicles in particular, we're at this kind of next fork in the road. And there's a question of what you do. I mean, the guy who's the head of the Danish cyclists organisation, I was asking him about a year ago, and his prediction was within a decade, Copenhagen will have no personal cars.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
And it's partly because they're much further advanced, but also the technology for autonomous vehicles is advancing really, really quickly. And in some ways, you suddenly get a lot of benefits because an enormous amount of space is taken up by car parking. I can go on endlessly and boring about parking. I really find it a fascinating subject. Not many people do, which is why I don't talk about it. But if you think of average city or town streets, so much of it's taken over with parking. But if you have a vision whereby you have a kind of app-based transport where no one owns a car, they just summon up a driverless vehicle to take them, there's suddenly a lot more space free. But by the same token, you also have this thing where it's very easy to have an inactive journey. And for the book, I spoke to someone from Sidewalk Labs, which is this Google spin-off, which is trying to reimagining the way that we live. And he had this kind of quite upbeat Truman Show vision of people taking driverless cars for longer distances, but then cycling the last mile or two home.
Right. Saying
that people want kind of non-traffic neighbourhoods. I don't know. The auto industry is so incredibly powerful, and there could be a pressure. You know, there was a cyclist killed by an autonomous vehicle in the States earlier this year, and there's this fear that the safety onus will be again on the cyclist. You know, you must wear an electronic tag which can be detected by a driverless vehicle. No one's actually said that yet, but that's possible. And it's basically all to play for.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I have no answer.
No.
I think there's another dimension to it too, which is that, I mean, bamboo is a token gesture in a bicycle, but once you've got a carload of steel and aluminium, that's actually a big amount of resources, and to produce those resources creates a big carbon footprint. So with your average car, it's the construction of the car that has a bigger carbon footprint than the running of it in terms of burning diesel or petrol. So that to me is another dimension of the whole argument about whether we have electric cars or driverless cars or no cars. That actually we do need to shift away from things made of steel and aluminium and other very, very high things that have a high energy, high carbon cost. Because unless we tackle climate change, a lot of these other conversations are going to become redundant. I mean, having been out of the country for a year and a half and come back, the news at the minute sounds like that Pete Postlethwaite documentary. You know, every time you turn it on, it's wildfires and heat waves and flash floods. And, I mean, it's really, really kicking off now, and it's only going to get worse. So we're going to have to start looking at the embedded energy and carbon footprint footprint, as well as the biodiversity costs, which we haven't even talked about, of these things, and that's a huge dimension in the whole car.
It's an interesting point about electric cars too, is that they do, obviously they're better than diesels in the emissions from the tailpipe are kind of virtually none, but what scientists are really interested in at the moment are the emissions that come from particulate matter, often from wearing tyres and from brakes, which they fear is as bad, if not worse, for our health than a diesel. And if you've got a kind of 3/4 of a tonne electric car, then it has the same problem.
Yeah. Just one last question, and then I'll throw it out to everyone else to ask questions. This is to Kate, but I mean, definitely open to both of you. So people lead busy, stressful lives, living in an age of austerity and cuts. But how can we build in time to consider vital issues of biodiversity and loss of climate change? How can people make a contribution to this and take action when the priority for them is kind of just day by day getting by?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one question is who's the we? So there are things that we can all do as individual we's, but there's also the we, which is our governments and bigger organisations and individuals. And I think that question is fascinating because part of the problem right now is exactly this, the assumption that we're too busy to worry about climate change or biodiversity loss. But we were talking this morning about how all life on Earth is fed by sunshine, but the only beings that can access sunshine directly and turn it into food, carbohydrate, are plants and things with green chlorophyll. What do plants need? They need pollinators. What's happening to pollinators? They're crashing, right? So biodiversity, looking after the diversity of life that gives us food, it's not a luxury, it's not a nice to have. We can't survive without plants, it's as simple as that. So it's not a question of when do we make time to look after biodiversity, it's how do we change things so that this is built in right from the start. When we design our transport infrastructure, we design it so it's biodiversity compatible. When we design our farming systems, or redesign them so they're biodiversity and climate compatible right from the outset. And unless we do that, we're going to stay in the current paradoxical situation, which is that the most intelligent species of life on Earth, allegedly, is systematically and knowingly undermining its own life support system. That's unsustainable, literally. We cannot carry on like this. So unless we make time, we're history. And we will, because the plus side is that there are so many win-wins. It's much, much more positive to ride to work and reduce your impact and be healthier and arrive with a grin on your face. And there are win-wins like that across the environmental spectrum. There are ways in which we could have a higher quality of life, which is much more equitable than the current situation for all people with a much, much lower environmental footprint. And that's the goal.
Thank you. Do you have any thoughts on that, Peter? Or
no, I mean, it puts it all very well. It's basically, everybody knows this, politicians know this. It's like the benefits of building bike lanes. They all know it would be good. There's just not the political will to basically take on the Daily Mail and do it.
But once they've read your book and mine, everybody will be on our side.
I wanted to throw out to the audience if anyone has any questions for Peter Cater. The lady in the blue, sorry.
Well, I'm not sure this is a question, but I would like your responses on this. And to come down to a more mundane level than the environmental one. Accepted that cars are the hugest danger, cars and vehicles are a huge danger to cyclists, and most cyclist deaths are caused by encounters with vehicles. Nevertheless, my personal experience cycling around parts of central Edinburgh is that the biggest danger to me is not the cars, because I'm well aware of what cars might do, but the bloody pedestrians. No, I tell you this is quite serious, because I've had 2 accidents out of 3 in all the years I've lived in Edinburgh which have been caused by pedestrians. And one accident was quite a serious one. And I regularly cycle across the meadows, which has got this huge cycle lane alongside a huge pedestrian lane, and I get sworn at sometimes when I ask people to get off the cycle path. So it does seem to me that alongside all of this, there needs to be a very serious attempt to educate the pedestrian public about bikes. Because sometimes I feel inclined to get one of these cameras on my helmet to exactly observe what pedestrians are doing.
yeah.
Wandering out in the road, seeing you, standing in your path. I mean, it's kind of crazy, and it's the one thing that puts me off cycling in Edinburgh.
I think that's your realm, Peter.
Without wishing to kind of defend that kind of type of action, because it is crazy, and there is obviously the argument that the smartphone is causing a problem, because half the time people are on the phone and, you know, step out. My argument would be, which is more of a kind of philosophical argument, is that it kind of comes with the territory, and in much the same way as a cyclist, I want drivers to take every possible care to not harm me, because they're the kind of next species up in terms of danger, and even that involves driving slowly, having to stop, arriving a few minutes later than you would have otherwise done. I think it's incumbent on cyclists to do the same. If someone's on foot, if they're acting like an idiot, well, they're acting like an idiot. People are idiots. And my estimation is there's roughly the same proportion of idiots on every form of transport. You know, so I think the same people who just step out without looking would probably, you know, drive too fast in a car or push past you to get the last seat on a train. The only difference is if they're in a car, they're statistically much more likely to kill or maim someone. It's physics rather than anything else. So I just think, you know, I think this idea of educating pedestrians or cyclists is a red herring. I think it's all about the next quickest thing up, just taking extra special desperate care. And that might not be a particularly popular answer. I don't think it's an issue really. I think it's just, you know, we just have to be careful.
But I do think you should get that film thing. That would be a YouTube hit for sure.
But it is the cars who will pose a danger to you.
Yeah.
You know, on average, it's going to be a motor vehicle that's going to, you know, do the real damage.
If we're able to go on to the gentleman with the sunglasses, please.
Mine sort of goes along with that, really. I was talking to a Dutch guy the other day, and I didn't realise the presumption in Holland is that the motorist is at fault if there's an accident, not the cyclist or, I guess, pedestrian. I just wondered if you had any comments about the possibility of introducing such a law here, or changing the law here.
I mean, this gets debated endlessly, this idea of the strict liability law, which is a bit more complicated than that. Whenever it's kind of talked about in some newspapers, they always have this kind of outraged tone as if even if a drunk person on a bicycle crashes into a stationary car, it'd be seen as a driver's fault. And it's not like that. It's just this presumption that the person in charge of the more powerful vehicle, whatever it is, has a duty to be more careful. I think it's really good. There's all sorts of complicated legal arguments as to why it perhaps works better in the Dutch legal system than the British one. It's a civil thing rather than a criminal thing. As with all these things, I think it's a kind of a symptom of the Dutch safety system rather than a cause. I think there's more important things we can focus on. If we decide to have it, great. I think there's quite strong legal and cultural reasons why it'd be quite difficult and unpopular to introduce in Britain. But, you know, if you had a Dutch-style kind of cycle infrastructure and cycle safety and everything else, then it would become suddenly less of an issue.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's just my opinion. There's some people who get really agitated about it.
Well, I mean, yeah. Typically, in any collision between a person and a car, I mean, the person, whether they're on foot or on bike, is going to come worst off. So definitely the presumption should be on the car driver for sure. I mean, I don't know as much as you do about the legal complications, but it's got to be possible, right?
It is possible. I mean, it always gets kind of misreported that people think it's about criminal law, but it's purely about the civil contingency. And there's a much stronger argument for saying that road danger should be policed and prosecuted much more strongly, because this is the one type of law breaking which is not only normalised, it's also kind of encouraged within newspapers.
Yeah.
You get newspapers who will protest vehemently against speed cameras, and speeding causes many more deaths than average year than say knives will, but you won't get a newspaper campaigning against policing against knife crime. It's just because it's something everyone does, so it's seen as normal.
I think I remember once reading an outraged piece about how if the presumption was always against the driver, you'd get cyclists racing through red lights, and you think, this can't have been written by a cyclist, because if you race through red lights as a cyclist, you're putting your life on the line, literally.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're not going to suddenly get this mad outbreak of cyclists jumping lights and causing chaos, because we could still all get hit by cars.
You still get
right?
squashed, yeah.
And that still is not good.
And on that note, unless anyone has any final questions, I think that we may have to finish up. But thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you very much.
That was amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.